All right, everyone. Enough farting around. I wanted to be live a few minutes ago, but I had some technical difficulties. Good evening, everyone. Baker Fairburn Hockey Show is back. January 4th, 2024. Before we begin, I'm going to do it at the top, Matthew. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Find us wherever you get your podcast, Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. Leave a 5-star review. Say whatever you want in the comments. I don't care. Okay. Matthew, welcome back. You might be the lucky charm.
Maybe.
Yep,
I don't know.
Maybe. We'll see. Yeah. Welcome back. We'll get into where you've been, maybe. How deep you want to go, that's up to you, of course. But Sabres begin 2024 with a 6-1 victory in Montreal, second largest margin of victory on the season. Their largest was when you were away on hiatus. We'll get to that. 6-1 win in Montreal for the Sabres tonight. Nice victory. Casey Mittelstadt, Jeff Skinner, Jack Quinn, Tage Thompson ×2, Rasmus Dahlin potted the empty netter. Devin Levi, 32 saves on 33 shots. Maybe a little help from the refs overturning a goal. We can maybe get into that also. But it worked out in the Sabres' favor. 6 Sabres had multiple points tonight, led by Jeff Skinner, goal and 3 assists. Tage Thompson, 2 goals and 1 assist. Matthias Samuelsson leading the way tonight. Nice time, 21 minutes and 32 seconds. Sabres, so it was a good victory for them. Outchanced Montreal. I have them at 27-20 in scoring chances. Scored twice on the power play out of 4 attempts. Generated some odd man rushes. Looked like a pretty coherent hockey team. And I think there's reason for that we might get into because since you've been gone, Matthew, I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a rundown. Since you've been...
It's a good idea. I could use it.
Let me. Yeah, go ahead, man. Yeah.
I was in yeah, so for those who don't know or who didn't see on Twitter, my wife had a baby on December 12th. So our second, another boy. So 2 boys, 2 under 3 in the Fairburn household right now. So as people can imagine, it's a chaotic time. So I was off for a few weeks, was back at the rink Wednesday, January 3rd. We're recording here on January 4th. So about 3 weeks, and it was an eventful 3 weeks. I had my eye on things a little bit after about the 1 week mark. Once, we kind of got home from the hospital and started settling into our rhythm a little bit. And there was a lot happening. Tim Graham was over there covering things for The Athletic in my absence, but there was a Seth Appert coaching debut in there. There was Fire Donnie chants. There was a beating of the Maple Leafs, an ass kicking at the hands of the Blue Jackets. It was a messy few weeks that I missed, but here I am back. Our last show was off of a win, right? The Bruins.
It was a 3-1 victory over the Bruins.
And then here we are in Devin Levi's return to Boston. And then here we are in Devin Levi's return to Montreal, a 6-1 win to start 2024, which many people are calling the year of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show.
Everyone's saying that. Everyone's saying that. I go to Wegmans, I go to Trader Joe's for the shit I can't get at Wegmans. Everyone's saying it's the year of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show.
Absolutely.
And it's true.
Yeah,
it's true.
So many people are saying it. And so here we are. They're right back on track. But yeah, there's a lot to get into with this hockey team. A lot that happened, and yet a lot that has stayed the same. A lot of similar issues. And I'm super interested. I know, there's people that are frustrated with where they're at, right? And, I understand that, but I'm also really interested in where they go from here, because rebuilds are not always linear, and they have hit a snag here of sorts. And so I'm not only interested in what happens on the ice, but what continues to happen off the ice and in the front office.
Yes. This is, I don't know, maybe I'm a sicko. Maybe I've been a Buffalo sports watcher forever too long. I don't know. But this can be fun to kind of sift through this stuff, try to, opine on how to fix things. Or it could be a forum for the fans that are frustrated to vent their frustration. I don't care. I'm cool with whatever, however it goes. But we will be here. We will be regular. We had our maintenance month.
Yes, we did.
It's over. Okay. Let's next time though, plan the next one. If there's going to be another Fairburn, can we do it in the summer?
Yeah,
do it in golf season, because you don't golf with me anyways.
Well, that's it has been a major detriment to my golf game. The golf round since becoming a father has been dramatically decreased. The analytics there are not working in my favor. But yes, the summer, baby gave us a lot more runway last time when I was covering football. This in the middle of the hockey season was a new experience for me, and covering professional sports, I haven't had like a few weeks like this where I was sort of out of the loop and out of touch. So, but I think the early returns here, it's a few weeks in. You don't want to make rash decisions, but we're sticking with a defensive pair here. We're sticking with man-to-man coverage. That's the plan. No zone coverage in our future if we can avoid it. So, yeah, we'll be back and we'll be rolling on a regular basis. I will probably be, you'll have to forgive some. I'll misspeak and I'll have poor takes from time to time as I'm sleeping 2 to 3 hours at a time. But we'll get back into the rhythm. We'll get it rolling.
We forgive you. Let's go. And hold your hands up. There's no soil. There's no soil on your hands, right? From changing diapers, you're good?
Nothing.
Okay, good.
Clean. No baby in my hand. Good. This is talking to an adult. This is good stuff.
That's good. Yeah, you kept your COVID habits up by washing your hands regularly. I like it. Good to see the hygiene, Matthew Fairburn. Welcome back formally. So, yeah, you mentioned golf, by the way. I'm not going to make this a golf podcast. I'm kind of pissed off though. Okay. Morikawa, first round leader bet was hanging there. Sahith Theegala comes in, shoots 9 under today. So whatever. I'm over it now that I said it. Okay. Let's get back to the Sabres. I'm still pissed about that though. Matthew, in your absence, put together a couple bullet points quickly. Some of them you already said. Okay. So while you're away, it was an 11-game stretch. Okay. Sabres won just 4 of those 11 games. I don't want to, I don't want to kind of chip away at the scar tissue that some of the fans have, but we got to go through it. Okay. You kind of mentioned it though. In that 11-game stretch, it included kind of a Jekyll and Hyde midweek thing where they had a 9-4 loss to Columbus and they came out and absolutely curb stomped Toronto 9-3 the very next game. That was a Tuesday, Thursday, I want to say. The Amherst, by the way, while you're away, won just 2 of 10 games. So it wasn't any better down on the farm. Okay. We did, to your point, have our first Fire Donnie chant. We can get into that. Maybe it's the Tim Graham curse. I don't know. Things seem to happen when Tim goes to the rink. Jack Quinn made his return while you were away. Sabres made a goalie move. One of our favorite topics since you and I started the show was the 3-headed goalie monster. We can't talk about it anymore. I mean, we can just for fun.
One more time. Maybe one more time. We can talk about its demise.
Watch him call him up tomorrow. Watch him recall Comrie tomorrow. Just so like we miss having him around. Let's just bring him back up. Having him, wasn't he like dressing outside and like
he looked
in the shower
bummed.
Or something like that?
He looked bummed in his press conference in Rochester, and he does not look bummed very often. He was dejected. Yeah. He had a quote at the end that really kind of hit me a little bit, where he was talking about when he was younger, something like this happens, and you're not too rattled because you're thinking about all the opportunity in front of you. And he said, now you kind of think, how much opportunity is there? And that was, that I know there's been a lot of hand wringing over the 3 goalie rotation and everything else, but on a human level, Eric Comrie and his wife also just had a baby about a month.
Yeah, that's
in November.
One of the things I think about.
He's whether he's commuting to Rochester, I'm not even sure how that all works. It's the reason Riley Sheehan asked to be released from his contract last year. With a young family and not wanting to do that. So this was supposed to be Eric Comrie's big break and big opportunity in Buffalo, and it didn't materialize. He didn't play a lot of games the last couple of years because of injuries and inconsistency, and so he's down there, and now it's the 2 youngsters that gotta dig the Sabres out of this hole they've dug themselves.
True. Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about the goaltending a little bit more, especially coming off Devin Levi's game tonight. A couple more bullet points I want to throw at you though, because I just thought they were kind of interesting stats. And Casey Middlestat, while you were away, recorded his first 5 shot on goal game of the season. It's a guy we've talked about, doesn't shoot the puck a lot. He also had 2 4-shot on goal efforts while you were away. Before you left, his season high was 3 shots on goal. Thought that was interesting. Alex Tuck, we talked about his ice time. He only went over 20 minutes once while you were away. Coming back from the little bit, he had that little time off, I think, there in early December, came back. He's only gone over 20 minutes one time. That was in the 2-0 loss to the Coyotes.
He also became a father.
He did. Yeah. What's going on? Like everyone.
2 days before our son was born, Alex Tuck. And then so did Tage Thompson.
Yeah.
4 4 Sabre babies this season. Victor Olofsson right before the start of training camp. It has been, as you pointed out, a busy time in the Sabres nursery this season.
It has been
Maybe
very,
contributing to some of the malaise and inconsistency we're seeing.
makes you wonder what's happening. But either way, that was it hockey wise. Because then, of course, I said yes, and you welcomed in addition to your family, but we already covered that. So it was your first game back, fresh eyes. You're fresh, right? Let's talk about tonight's game. I kind of gave you a little bit of a rundown numerically. Fill in the gaps for me. Was there anything that I forgot? What were your general observations tonight? Just kind of coming back, being away from the team for almost a month.
Well, my main thing is I don't know what everybody's so worried about. They look great. This I don't know what all the all this angst is about. This looks like a juggernaut of a hockey team that's just rolling right along. If you plopped yourself into the middle of the season, you would think this is how the Sabres were supposed to look in a lot of ways. Couple power play goals, finally, getting some things rolling there. Probably what was top of mind for me, and you mentioned it in the rundown there, Jack Quinn's return. Because when we talked about Jack Quinn being inserted into this lineup at some point in the season, we thought it would probably come around now, not in mid-December like it did. And my big question was, how much do you want to bank on Jack Quinn being Jack Quinn right away? And he has been the same player we saw at the end of last season, maybe even a little bit better. And I wrote about this tonight, and it'll be posted at The Athletic at some point in the early morning hours. But I talked to Jack Quinn yesterday, and I was just amazed at how he's come back and hit the ground running. He now has 4 goals in 7 games, 5 points in 7 games, positive in the expected or in the shot attempt share at 5-on-5. He's just been excellent, and an under the radar aspect of his absence, I think, was he was able to spend a ton of time in the shooting room, number one. But number two, when we were talking, he mentioned he doesn't use, last year he didn't have a lot of time to study other players because you're just trying to get through your rookie season and compete. But he spent a lot of time watching Austin Matthews, David Pastrnak, Artemi Panarin, Nikita Kucherov, some of the guys he rattled off that he likes to watch, and gives you an idea of he was working the brain, he was working the shot and the stick handling in the shooting room, and the physical part of it from a skating standpoint didn't seem to be a huge issue. So encouraging for sure when you're talking about micro and macro, I think, for these Sabres, because on a micro level, they need them right now if they're going to find a way to scratch and claw back into the playoff picture, which is a long shot, but not impossible. But on a macro level, and we'll get into this, just when you think about how you build this roster, who stays, who goes, how much of the core remains intact, you're making a decision on Jack Quinn relatively soon. And so seeing him return to this form and look like he's ready to elevate, I think is really encouraging. That goal he had tonight, third period, it's 2-1, puts him up 3-1, changes the release angle on his shot a little bit, and it was a really, really good shot. So timely goal, and he has just been, I wouldn't have expected it, frankly, to see 5 points in 7 games and 4 goals in 7 games. It's been definitely encouraging.
The noticeable thing with Quinn that I think kind of changes the whole team dynamic. I mean, we talked about this kind of waiting for him to come back, was it kind of balances the lines out when you have that winger. They needed some wing help. They needed some goals coming from the wing. You get him back and you're getting that immediately. It's not the scoring though. It's the jam in his game, the compete, the forechecks that he had tonight. And it's not just tonight. It's since day one, since he came back into the lineup. It changes the way that the team looks on the ice when he's out there competing the way that he is. I think that's been the understated part of his game always, but it's really shining now because it's also been a deficiency of this team leading up, into December. And then they had that, 4-game losing streak that they had or whatever, right before they kind of righted the ship before you had to bounce out for a couple weeks. It just changes everything. The funny thing is though, is that he comes back And now JJ Peterka is he can't score. I think tonight was his 10th game in a row without a goal. And I was looking at his numbers last year. He hates winter. He hates December. He had a 26 game goal drought last year. It started December 13th. It started this year. It started December 13th this year. I think last year it went from like December 15th. I wrote it down through February 26th. And he's kind of in that same stretch of the calendar where the goals have dried up again. But that line has played well without JJ scoring, I think. I mean, you probably haven't watched the games as closely as you normally do when you were away, but I don't know. It's just it's interesting. You get Quinn back, things are firing, you're encouraging. On that opposite wing, the guys just kind of dried up. Did you notice anything from Peterka tonight? I mean, he had some points, I want to say
He hit a
tonight.
post. He hit
Yeah,
a
he did hit a
post.
post. Yeah.
So, it's close. And that's what you want more than anything out of that. Putting Jack Quinn back in the lineup is to have that whole trio working together, because Dylan Cousins has not been the Dylan Cousins of last season this year. And Peterka was off to that really strong start, and he hits a bit of a cold spell. But I think what I like about JJ Peterka, generally watching him night in, night out, is, and I can't speak entirely for the entirety of this goal drought, but there's other parts of his game where he's useful, and it's not just the goals. And so when it's just JJ Peterka and Dylan Cousins and insert whoever, there's a little bit more pressure on JJ Peterka to carry the line. Well, now
Mhm.
that's spread out. I think you can stomach a goal drought from JJ Peterka when Jack Quinn has 4 and 7 games. It's about the production of the line. They do, they're still figuring out they got outchanced early tonight. They were, letting up a lot the other way, but those guys are all still so young. So it's interesting you bring up the compete with Jack Quinn, because it is the part of his game, that and just the mental part, where he can see where the puck is going to be and anticipate where it's going to be. And you combine that with compete and the way he shoots, he's a really nice piece to have. And I wasn't so sure even before the injury, like, what step could he take? And it's only 7 games, but just the line as a whole looks so much better with him on it. And the hope has to be that it can elevate, whether Peterka's goal numbers stay what they were at the beginning of the season or not. The hope is that that whole line can get back to where it was at the end of last season. And maybe that brings a little something out in Dylan Cousins too, because that's a guy that really needs to get going.
Yeah, and I don't have Cousins numbers. I know that Ottawa game, I want to say like Peterka was -4, Quinn was -3. They kind of got out, that wasn't their best game, obviously, against the Ottawa game on New Year's Eve, but much better effort overall tonight. I still, we can talk about the goal scoring, we can talk about the line combinations, D pairs that kind of moved around, but I think the story of tonight's game for me, and it was pretty clear early on, was Devin Levi. I mean, he looked excellent tonight. He was just really in charge of his space. He really owned his space tonight, really sharp. I don't know if he was inspired to be playing back in Montreal. I'm sure it was part of it. But man, he was just crisp out there, right on top of pucks. He looks so good tonight. Are we thinking he played, I think, 7 of the 11 games, by the way. I was looking at that too while you were away. Seems like it's his job again. Kind of like how we came into the season. You
It
feeling the same
does.
thing? Yeah.
So Natural Stat Trick had him down for 7 high danger saves in the first period of this game. And I think there were 2 or 3 of those that came in the first 3 minutes. It looks like a much different hockey game if one of those goes in. And I think that's been the goalie problem this team has had. I think goaltending has gotten a bit of a pass this year as one of the team's issues, because they've had so many issues that you can't just blame. You can't just say if they had good goaltending, they'd be a good team.
The
But
expected goals against has been such a bad stat for them though too, that it's like it's hard to have that
exactly,
conversation.
exactly. That's why I think you can't really, as much as that felt like a misstep in the offseason, it's not even the biggest problem. But I think the goaltending problem has been early in games where you let in a goal or two. They've been an awful first period hockey team. Like the worst first period hockey team in the NHL from a goal
And just to get
differential
a plug,
standpoint.
sorry,
From
not to step on you, just to get a plug on that though, right? I think Tim did a story about the first period woes in your absence on The Athletic. If anyone didn't check that out,
and
I
Kevin
think he,
Snow had a great stat that they were, I think they're 2-15-1 when they allow 2 goals in the first period or something like that. But even just allowing that many goals in the first period that often. Um,
yeah,
but I was looking at it coming into this game, their first period goal differential was worse than the Sharks, -24, and it stayed
jeez,
flat tonight. So if the Shark, I guess we'll see what the Sharks do, but it was, and some of that is goaltending, right? You let in an early goal. The time you let in a goal matters. You know, you can look at the stats and say, well, the goaltending, this or that, Luukkonen, Levi, their save percentages, whatever. But that goal in the first 5 minutes, if you're not sharp, that changes how a hockey game goes in a big way. So those were huge, huge saves from Devin Levi. And this becomes a really interesting season for Devin Levi because we had a lot of conversations about how he probably should be in the AHL, right? And then he gets sent down to the AHL, comes up after 2 games, and the way he's talking after those 2 games is, man, I'll remember that experience for the rest of my life in the AHL. And that was after the Boston game, and I'm thinking, you might be back down there, dude. Like you might not need to cling to that memory too long because you might be back down there. Then he gets hot. And let me pull up the numbers because I have it in front of me. He had 4 straight games above. He came in after getting pulled up from the AHL and had 4 straight games with a save percentage above 90% and was 3-0-1. And then he had 4 straight games with a save percentage below 90% coming into this game. So you want to see him even it out, right? And that's part of being a rookie goalie, being 21 years old. You mentioned being back in Montreal was a huge, huge deal for him.
family was there, a lot of
He
friends.
was first game in Montreal, and it almost felt like this weird. Played well against Montreal in an overtime shootout loss against his old college, his fellow Northeastern guy there, Caden Primo, had a great game that night.
Mhm.
But
Another Northeastern guy I think scored on him in that game too, right?
yes,
Struble, one of his
yeah,
defensemen. Yeah.
big night for the Huskies there. But he has been sharp in these games where last game we were talking about, Levi going back to Boston, had a lot of friends and
Mhm.
folks in the stands there and a rink that he was comfortable in and had memories in. He locks in these moments, which is encouraging to see. Now it's just a matter of he needs to learn to be that guy more often and on a night to night basis. You can get up for the big games, right? Your homecoming game, Boston, Vegas, whatever it may be. How about the Tuesday night in Winnipeg or whatever it may be, right? The game that isn't circled on your calendar. Can that one also be a really strong game? Because Levi now is in a spot where he and Luukkonen are the 2 goalies. They're getting all the practice reps. They're going to get all the games. And I think it can be good for his development now. And I know I was on the AHL train and still think that was probably the right move at the start of the season. But he's here now, right?
Mhm.
At this point, it's far enough along that he's here. And what I like about the situation he's in now is a little bit of the pressure feels like it's off Levi for a couple reasons. One, he did go down to the AHL. So we don't have to talk about how he's the only goalie ever to try to skip the
Yeah,
AHL from
they
college.
broke the ice. Yeah,
Right.
it was a
That was
big move
nice.
for him and Adams both to get it out of the way to know that it can happen.
Exactly.
We kinda talked about that, I think,
We
the
don't
last
have
time
to
we were together.
reference that
Yeah.
every time we talk about him and when he's struggling. But number 2 is that this team is really a long shot for the playoffs now. And that's not really Devin Levi's fault. I think he's contributed, you know, a lot of people share blame. It's not, but it's definitely not just the way Devin Levi played early in the season. But now that some of that playoff pressure it's gone a little bit
They could
for
play a little
Levi.
more free because, well,
Right.
history shows that this group doesn't handle the pressure. If you go back, like we talked
Exactly.
about last year, coming out of the All-Star break,
And
elevations were heightened and they kind of crapped their pants.
talked
Came into
about
the
it in the
season
preseason,
thinking,
right?
yeah,
How would they handle it? They didn't handle it well. And now I think the thought is you look at the playoff projection models at the Athletic, at Money Puck, they're at like 3% because they need to play at essentially a 650 point percentage the rest of the way just to match their point total from last season. They're 6 points behind where they were at this point last season through 39 games. So it's not looking good. Even though they're somewhat close from a pure points perspective, there's a lot of teams between them. They're going to have to go on a pretty crazy run to pull it off. And this is a team that has not won more than 2 games in a row since November and has only done 2 once all season. So there's all of that to say that Levi no longer is playing on a team that's holding a wild card spot or is second in the division, and every point does matter, but it's more of a back against the wall. Nobody thinks we can pull this off. And that's kind of like what he entered the team last year. They were pretty much out of it, but then they go on a crazy run when he got there, and all of a sudden they were right in the mix. So without the same pressure, and now with not 3 goalies and having gone to the AHL, I'm a little bit more okay with the spot he's in. I think it could be good for his development, and it could be fun. He's one of the interesting things to track the rest of the way, I feel like, regardless of how the season goes.
Yeah, he's an interesting human,
Right.
but he's an interesting subject in this whole Sabres sphere, especially in the season and kind of where they're at in the season right now. If he keeps playing the way he played tonight, moving forward, especially this month. Okay, so if the pressure is kind of off a little bit, and in theory they can play freer than they have, and Granado still has to work him though. He still has to be hard on him. Okay, maybe harder than he's been historically. This stretch of the schedule gives them an opportunity. I think things kind of line up in their favor. And I'm not trying to be overly optimistic. And the fans don't want to hear that. I know that. Okay. But you look at the schedule. So they had Montreal tonight, got Pittsburgh coming up in Pittsburgh, Seattle, Ottawa, maybe a little revenge factor against Ottawa. They just lost to them. Vancouver. But you have San Jose, Chicago, Tampa, Anaheim. Well, then you go out west, right? You have Anaheim, LA, San Jose. So you have the Sharks twice. In a span of what? 2.5 or a week and a half ish. There's some winnable games there. And again, if the pressure is kind of off them a little bit, they're starting to score some goals. Maybe tonight gives them a little more confidence. The Jack Quinn factor is a little bit deeper. Season resume really starts grooving. Maybe you get Paterka back. Middle stats kind of going. That line's going fairly well. Still, I think they play well together. Thompson gets a couple of the night. Jeff Skinner, you get that top line back. Things could be moving in a better direction than they've been. You get the goaltending, then we don't have to have that conversation that we thought maybe we've been ignoring anyways. It's been a real issue, the goaltending.
Right.
Devin Levi played his ass off tonight.
And it's an interesting dynamic because I don't feel like the pressure is totally off the rest of the group. It is in a way because it's like, well, it's a lot of people have basically written them off, which
that's kind of what I'm saying.
They seem to prefer that. They should feel the weight, like to your point, Don Granato should not be letting the foot off the gas because I think Don Granato and I think a lot of these players should feel the weight of what has happened in the first 39 games of the season because it's on them. I don't think Devin Levi needs to feel that weight because he's a rookie. And there was a lot of reasons why they didn't play well in the first half of the season. And you go down a long list before you get to Devin Levi, I think. He probably shouldn't have been in that position to begin with. So, but I do think it'll probably impact the rest of the team. And you need probably the number one factor that can help you go on a crazy little streak that gets you back in the mix is goaltending, right?
Mhm.
Like if you can get rolling, if you can get a hot goalie, it's going to cover up. The offense isn't going to be rolling every night. You're going to have some weird nights. You're going to be off. You're not going to be feeling good. But goaltending can start stealing games. You're right. The schedule is there, but I need to see so much more before I even entertain the thought. Because when I came back, my brain was in evaluation mode almost. It's like who should stay here and who shouldn't, because it is, like I said, a climb to get back to where they need to be. Now every year is different. What point number gets you in one year, it's different every year, but
Yeah.
the math is tough for them unless they can rip off a bit of a streak.
This is the stretch. So while you were away, I think I cheated on you a couple times. I did a couple podcasts.
That's
Went
okay.
on with yeah.
You went on
one of the
TV like a fancy boy.
I did go on TV. Yeah, and I got a plug-in for this YouTube channel that we're on, by the way. So we'll see. Maybe
It was
it'll pay off.
productive.
I don't know. Yeah, it was nice. But one of the podcasts that I did, I talked about. It was right after Christmas. World Juniors was going on. Canada was playing Latvia, so whenever that was, 27th, something like that. And was basically saying, the next 5 games are going to kind of tell the story on if this team is going to respond to Granato in play. So they've won a couple of them, right? But they haven't really dominated those games.
But Donnie was out too, right?
Well, Donnie was out. Yeah, that's true. I
He was
forgot
out for
about
2
that.
of
That's
those
how
games.
my mind has been on the World Series. I forgot about that, to be honest with you. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So maybe, okay. So we'll give it a little more. We'll give it a little more, a couple more games. But to your point, yeah, the evaluation, I guess you look at it and, if they say there's a stretch coming up, we all agree, like the comment on the screen, 7 out of 10 games are against non-playoff teams, next 10. If you don't win, I don't know what's success in those games. What, 6 wins?
At least
7 wins? I don't know.
6 or 7. Yeah.
6 or 7, right? If they don't hit the mark, then I think the story of the season. It's not like we got to sit here and play this game and keep stretching it out. What are they going to do? When are they going to respond? If you're not winning with this group of guys, something needs to change, right? To your point, you're saying I came back thinking I'm in evaluation mode and kind of what pieces get moved out. How do you build this thing up? Is it a coaching change? So I guess we should talk about that, right? Because it's a real possibility.
Yeah,
History tells us that this team isn't going to win 2 in a row.
right. They've done it once all year. And, it's one of those things. Until they do it, right? Because we're talking about, if they can go on a 7-game winning streak, they're right back in it. Well, there's no evidence to suggest that they can do that because they can't even go on a 2-game winning streak very often this season. So that needs to be where it starts. But my brain is still in the mode of how do you fix this? Because or, we can talk about all possibilities here because this is also a real possibility based on how Kevin Adams has operated. Is it well, there was some injuries, still young, learning through the experience, bring back most of the group and see what happens. But we should have the coaching conversation because we missed the opportunity to have it while I was out and while it was front of mind for a lot of people, and it hasn't gone away. But I think I mentioned on this show, Don Granato is the seventh or eighth longest tenured coach in the NHL, and the longest tenured coach who has not made the playoffs. The longest tenured coach with a point percentage below 50% as a head coach in the NHL. And
Not great.
I like Don Granato. I think he's done a lot of good things for the Sabres. He's done a lot of good things for individual players on the Sabres. But the case for a coaching change is in what I just mentioned. It happens a lot in the NHL. Yeah. And maybe that's not the appropriate trend. I don't know. Maybe there is something to be said for patience and riding things out. But I thought the case to be made for it was that the young players, or this core of players, kind of needed their cages rattled a little bit. And what better way to do it than to be like, that coach you guys like so much, y'all just got him fired. This is the NHL. This is how it works. And the way you guys played and responded to him, he is now not your coach anymore. And maybe a different flavor gets guys to respond a little bit differently. Feels like they missed the window to me. You're sitting here in January and you're not 2 points out of the wild card, right? You're chasing it. It feels like a window was missed. Like at this point, you ride it out unless things get really bad and you need to make the change for the sake of making the change and maybe
He
see
seems committed. He being Kevin, he seems
He does.
committed to Granato.
Because Granato is a reflection of him in a lot of ways. And they're tied at the hip philosophically. They have, I think Granato has had a fair deal of input on this roster. I think that's fair to say, given a lot of the connections he has to former players and his background in the league as a scout, and having seen both sides of it. So there's some of that, right? You're protecting your own image a little bit, but that's why I bring up that point about will Kevin Adams try to maintain status quo as much as possible from a roster standpoint, because I do feel like that's what he's going to do coaching, at least through the end of the year. It feels that way. If it gets worse, everything's on the table. But what I found interesting was Seth Appert getting the call up. And I know the reasoning they gave is you want the head coach chair to be the only thing that changes instead of moving all the pieces around. And that's fine.
Doesn't mean it's the real reason, though.
But it doesn't mean it's the real reason. And it doesn't mean that there's not an additional benefit of getting a look, right? Let's face it, Matt Ellis is not going to be an NHL head coach. Not anytime soon, anyways, not here in Buffalo. And if you were going the interim route, you'd probably go Seth Appert, right? Of the available options in the organization, you'd have to.
I think,
you'd have to think about it, unless you are doing like what the Wild did, and you're immediately making a hire, right, and going out and getting a free agent coach and plugging them in,
which has worked,
it's working well for Minnesota. They've hit a bit of a snag, but they got the new coach bump. That's why I feel like the Sabres might have been a little late to get that. Would it be too little too late to get a little bit of a new coach bump? But it has to be, if they miss the playoffs, it has to be a conversation at the start of the offseason. It has to be on the table. And again, as somebody who I enjoy dealing with Don Granato, I've been impressed by the job he's done pulling them out of the cellar, reviving some careers of some young players that seemed a little bit lost. But NHL teams change their coaches so often that he's not immune to that, especially as a first-time coach. You're not talking about Lindy Ruff or Rod Brendamore, some big ticket, long time, proven track record where you want to let him ride it out. This is a guy that's never done it. Never shown.
Brindamore not under contract next year, by the way.
He's a free agent. Look, I've thought about that, and I know he played with Kevin Adams.
Yeah.
I think it would be a great thing for the Sabres. I just can't see it from his perspective. His family seems pretty comfortable in Carolina. I don't know if he would make a move, period. But if he does, because Carolina doesn't want to pay him or whatever it may be, coming to this team,
I don't see it. No,
he would have
more
attractive options. But
it's going to be a conversation if he goes into the offseason and the Sabres don't make the playoffs. It's going to be a conversation. People are going to talk about it.
It should, but he would have to coach Jeff Skinner, so that would probably be a problem for him.
or does he? Or does he?
Well,
but yeah,
or just find a way to trade that contract.
Yeah, I think there's a clause in there too that makes it pretty difficult. But I would say on the Appert thing, like you pose a question, like you think it would be Appert on an interim level. I don't know. Like if that's your move that you're planning to make if you have to make a move on Granato, don't make a move on Granato, honestly, because it's more of the same. It's another developmental coach.
Well,
It's not an
yes.
established coach. Appert, to me, is a great coach for where he is. I've never thought of him on an NHL bench yet. Maybe someday, just from the way that my brain has worked and with him and knowing what his resume is, I haven't gone there yet. So to the farm and you're calling up the Amerks coach when you can, the guy that you have. I'm not saying it's that, but I haven't thought of Appert as the guy. It's an easy call to make, obviously. And it's like your knee jerk, like, oh, I got to make a move. But you're also getting a familiar face in front of a group that's very comfortable, clearly. And I don't know if that would be the move that I would make. Actually, I know it's not the move that I would make. And that's part
I
of the problem
agree.
is you can't get rid of the coach without having an answer who you're going to go and get. And I don't know who that is right now.
I agree with you. It was part of when before I had a few weeks off and the Granato thing had entered my mind. I was thinking the same thing, that you do it if you have a free agent, experienced coach in mind that you're going to plug right in the way Minnesota did. Because if the move is to go to an interim, the reason I pose the question that way is if you are going to an interim, which means you're going with somebody in the organization, in my mind, when I think of that label.
Yeah.
Appert seems like he's most qualified of the coaches in the organization to step in. But what I mentioned about rattling cages, it has nothing to do with Seth Appert's chops as a potential future NHL coach or an asset to the organization, which I believe he has been in Rochester. But it's exactly what you said. It's whatever effect it would have on this comfortable group of players to be like, wow, we just got Don Granato fired. It would be like, oh, awesome, Seth's here, right? Because Jack Quinn,
Yeah.
AJ Paterka, Matthias Samuelsson, Ukko Pekka, like how many of these guys played for him in Rochester, and how many of them have gotten to know him at development camp or rookie camp or training camp. So you would lose the shock factor with the team,
You're not
and
going
it
to
would be
wake the guys
more,
up fully. Like, yeah, I'm
yeah,
not going to say that it's it's not going to do shit, right? I'm not going to say that. Like, if you remove Granato from the staff, it's going to have an effect on the guys, but it's not going to fully achieve the mission of what you're trying to do to fully wake the group up if you go and bring Appert in. That's kind of what I was trying to say. And I
right.
think
And you're
you get
not,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and you're not going to get a full, to your other point, you're not going to get a full philosophical hockey change either, right? Because I think Appert and Granato are pretty closely aligned. Similar background too, like you mentioned, from a developmental coach standpoint, working with young players. So he would make the most sense as an interim because I think he's just the most qualified of the people in the organization to step in on an interim basis. But you'd rather have a better answer. And if you don't have a better answer, you you try to give Granato as much runway as possible, I think. But there are other coaches out there. You know, there's you just have to be ready. You have to be a couple things. You have to be ready to make the move and you know, make a bold change if you're Kevin. Got to be ready to pay too, right, Chris? Like this is a question, I think, about generally speaking, you know, ever since Terry Pagula was the last time he spoke, I believe, on the record in an interview setting was during the pandemic and just flat out said that one of their goals was to be more economic and efficient. And that's a label that's hard to shed is when you put those words out there just plain as day like that. Yes, it was a pandemic and there were financial things to consider, but now you're down near the bottom of the league in spending from a salary cap standpoint year after year, part of a hockey strategy and how they've built, but still rebuilding that scouting department. Still, you know, so I think there's questions about how much are they spending, not to mention the attendance problems and how much money team's not getting playoff revenue for the last 12 years. So from a financial standpoint, the organization's not in the best shape. So that's another Rod Brendamore question, right? Forget whether he would want to come here, whether they would even be an attractive enough option from a roster standpoint. Could they afford him? Would they be willing? Because as it stands right now, you know, Terry Pagula made a lot of moves that were not just the easy moves, but they were the most cost efficient moves. And so
Yeah.
you need to, if it's a Bruce Boudreau or whoever, whatever names that's out there, that's like, well, I need this number. And if you're not willing to do that without a full search too, right? Because there's that aspect. That all plays into the Granato factor. It's like, well, maybe you just stick with the guy and let him have the full, now that the roster's healthy, and see where this thing goes.
What do you think the reaction in this town would be if they had to make a move on Granato? They get into the offseason and you start hearing whispers of reports that the Sabres are talking to Joel Quenneville. And I'm not saying that that's happening, by the way. But what do you think, like, how that would go in town? I'm just throwing it out there. It's not on my sheet. It's not on the agenda. I just started thinking about it when we were talking, because here's a coach that might actually be interested in the Buffalo job if he wants to get back into coaching. And
That'd
I know
be a
he was
risk.
doing a little bit of a tour. It would be a risk, right? But also, like, it would be a risk for the Sabres, be a PR risk. But it would also be, there's upside there for a been there, done that perspective of a guy who's proven that he can get a team to win. People would hate it.
Yeah, I
People
think
would absolutely hate it.
it would be one of those things where, it's not entirely dissimilar to the Patrick Kane conversation.
Well, that's kind of where I was going. Yeah.
From earlier in the season, where I just think the Buffalo Sabres have lost so much benefit of the doubt and goodwill locally, that they don't get to make a move like that, right? You don't get to make the questionable hire from an ethical standpoint. Like, you don't get to do that. Maybe it's like the desperation move or whatever, but already the image of this franchise has been tarnished in a major way over the last dozen years. And to go and do that is just asking for it to be even worse from a public image.
It's a risk.
standpoint.
I don't disagree. Yeah.
But like you said, if it
Fun to
works
talk
and
about,
they win, ultimately winning is the magic elixir. It fixes your financial problems, it fixes your public image problem, it gets fans back in the building, and it makes people. That's the way sports fans operate in a lot of ways, is that it does not matter necessarily how, as long as the wins are happening. And so
I'm afraid to look at the comments, but I'm sure there's probably some. I haven't looked at the comment section, but
Brian
I am
Cummings
curious. I'm afraid.
asked, he still needs to get reinstated, right? He still needs to talk his way.
I don't
That's
know.
probably.
I don't know
I don't know
where
if
he's
he was
at. I
ever
know
officially banned, but it strikes me as something that would need commissioner clearance to make a hire
he
like
had a
that.
meeting with the NHL, I think, or something in September of 2023. I'm not going to read it on the fly. I haven't been tracking, Joel Quenneville's whereabouts. It said profile of a couple. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that. Resume, win-loss resume. That would be very attractive, obviously. If you look back too, by the way, I know different financial time for the team and everything else. This was an organization that once upon a time did pursue Mike Babcock. Right. And so it's like, is it that far-fetched to think that they would go big game hunting for a coach? Again, if you kind of look at, it might be, like, honestly, the best match for Joel Quenneville, like the reclamation project for both sides, his image, but also him showing that he can still coach in this league with a talented group of players. Let's not sit here and pretend the Sabres don't have talent, right? But it would be so wild. But that's why I teed it up the way that I did. I'm like, what do you think the reaction would be?
Not great.
This isn't a very forgiving society.
No.
Yeah.
And it would be one of, like I said, if it'd be different if this were the Sabres when they were pursuing Mike Babcock, even, right? That's a different time. Long playoff drought, but not as long as it is now, where they still had a lot of goodwill, and you could burn some of it with a hire like that. There's no goodwill left. You don't get to do that anymore. I mean, you don't get to, but are they willing to go big game hunting at all financially is a legitimate question. And number two, what kind of pool are you picking from? Because there's only 32 of these jobs, but some of these guys are a little bit choosy because of what I talked about, how often these coaches change. There's already been, what, 4 firings this year, I think? Is that right? Minnesota,
Yeah.
Edmonton, Ottawa, and St. Louis, right? Fired its coach. Craig Berube got fired, I think.
Yeah.
So
Yep. Ruby's gone. Yeah.
at least 4. So if you're a free agent coach, you can sit there and say, well, I don't need to go to Buffalo because I could just hang out and wait until November and see who gets fired. A little bit of a risky strategy, but there may be some experienced coaches that would rather sit at home and wait than jump into Buffalo, given the way they've churned through coaches. The roster is good enough to be attractive. It's a matter of if they're willing to spend. And I think from a spending standpoint, that is something that you have to prove before I believe it, because you can say there's no internal cap. You can say X, Y, and Z, but Terry Pegula still said what he said in 2020, and the spending has been what it's been on the roster over the last few years. So that's a big next step, both in the coaching conversation and the roster conversation, because you can't be near the bottom of the league in spending and expect to end the playoff drought. And I know they've handed out all these big contracts, and they've, not advocating going and just going on a free agent bender, but there are, I just want to see, now that they're in this window of that should be their competitive window. Now, how do you spend? Because that tells the real story more so than saying all the right things.
You mentioned Bruce Boudreau. That's interesting. He just actually was behind the bench with Canada at the Spengler Cup. So he clearly still has the itch to coach. That would be kind of interesting. Is that a Band-Aid though? If you bring in a Bruce Boudreau at this point, I don't know, but I mean, because for me, there's plenty of young coaches that I like, if it comes down to it, again, we're just going on this hypothetical that Don Granato, this is on the Sabres don't make the playoffs. They have to make a move on Granato. Who do you get? What's the pool, right? Young coaches, Mike Pekka's name will come up quite a bit. Nate Lehman from Providence College, his name will come up quite a bit. Another USA Hockey pedigree guy, coached World Juniors, successful run with Providence. But is that more, first, outside of Bilesma, I'm trying to think who else they've had that's been an established guy. You know what I mean? So it's, what are you going to do? Look at Gallant? I mean, I don't know.
Jay Woodcroft,
we could talk about it more later. Yeah, maybe.
Jay Woodcroft. I mean, Jay McKee is putting together a nice resume in the OHL.
Yeah.
Get a former player in here, a former Sabre, well liked. Yeah, there would be plenty of time to go through the candidates if they decide to go that route, but it's a multi-layered conversation in terms of what they're willing to spend and who'd be willing to come here. And a lot of that probably depends on what they look like on the ice over the next month, couple months, rest
Maybe
of the
they'll
season.
Win 7 in a row. That's right. Maybe they'll win 7 in a row. But let's just start with 2. Let's just start with getting them to win 2 in a row. Hey, real quick update, by the way, I'm going to do, prospect podcast after the World Juniors, which ends tomorrow. But for those that have been mildly paying attention or haven't been paying attention at all, gold medal game tomorrow. USA, Sweden should be a really good one. Sabres have Anton Wahlberg, Noah Ostlund playing for Sweden in that one. Yuri Kulik and the Czechs got bounced out of gold medal contention today, losing to the Swedes. So they will play Finland tomorrow for bronze. That'll be the first game of the day. So a couple prospects still playing World Juniors tomorrow. Prospect Avenue will come out probably over the weekend. Get into that. There's a lot going on in the prospect ranks I have to get to. Topias Lainen. Well, I can't wait. Can't wait to do that. Solo podcasts are horrible. I love doing this with you. It's conversational. Doing my other prospect podcast, pain in the ass, man. I have to sit there and just talk, and I use a lot of connectors, Yeah, that sucks, man.
At least
So
this
thank you for
time
coming back.
there's a lot of fresh material for you with the World Juniors. Sturbach had a great little tournament for himself. The Cooley
He's awesome, man.
conversation, Cooley being willing to
Yeah.
go there and carry the Czechs farther than I think a lot of people expected. And I know the "your boy" label is applied to Savoy, but I feel like "your boy" is really Noah Ostlund driving the train for Team Sweden, and
Yeah.
you're ahead of the curve there on the Noah Ostlund train, and I think the train has left the station. People are getting
He's a good player.
people who are still willing
Yeah.
to get excited
Sorry.
about prospects are excited about Noah Ostlund. Maybe the best of the three. Who knows?
Yeah. No, I can make the case for that. I can make the case for that. As good as Kulik's been and everything. Yeah. Kulik, man. It was kind of funny though. The first thing I thought of tonight, so I don't know if you saw, well, yeah, you probably watched the broadcast tonight. Marty did a little bit of a PP video on Stamkos and McKinnon showing how they line up at the dot inside the house. That's what they got to get Kulik doing now. So many of his sweet spot, and look, it works in the AHL. He loves being outside of the dot though. So he's outside of the house. I think the next evolution of Kulik is getting him in more, because when he gets that different angle at the net, you get better rebounds. Now, the thing that works for Kulik when he's outside is that he's incredibly accurate with that one-timer, man. He doesn't miss. So, that helps him if he does stay outside. But I thought that video that Marty put up was really interesting because the first player you think of is Kulik in my world. And if they can get him inside a little bit more, I think it'll just make him even more effective when he comes out to Buffalo. And he will be in Buffalo. I mean, that's just no brainer, obviously. But yeah, someone asked for a prediction. My prediction at the beginning of the tournament, it's going to be unwavered. I think that I love Sweden playing at home, but I think the U.S. can be too much. I think the U.S. is going to be too much. But we'll see, man. The U.S. last couple of games, they haven't looked as strong. What I hated, like as a USA hockey guy, I wouldn't hate it if Sweden won. To see that team, that group of players win on home ice in that environment would be pretty crazy. It'd be awesome for the sport. It'd be really cool for the players, obviously. I think US, they have the juice here. I think tomorrow. Score prediction, man, I don't know. I think it's gonna be pretty tight. It's gonna be like a 4-2 empty netter. That's my prediction.
It's a good USA team. It's a good USA team. Lack of Buffalo-born players. What do we make of that? Is it abnormal? Has
the rest
it
of the
waned
world,
over
I mean, the
years?
rest of the country's caught up, man. Oh yeah, it's definitely waned. I mean, like when I was younger, Buffalo was hotbed, man, in the 80s, early 90s. My brother played on a select 16 team in like 86. That's like the World Juniors for 16-year-olds, basically, World Cup 86. And they had like 4 or 5 kids from Buffalo just on that team, to kind of give you an idea. Right now, you're looking at Quentin Musty as like the guy right now that would be in contention. Didn't make the team for Team USA. Gavin McCarthy might be able to take a run at it next year. He's having a pretty good year at BU. I have to check his birth date. I think he's a summer baby though, so he's fine. I could see him maybe, I think he'll be in the camp. Whether or not he makes the team, we'll see, but yeah, no, there's you look, man, at the roster, you have kids from, Florida, Arizona, California. It's awesome. It's great. It's great, man. It's a really good goalie playing, he's in the Western League past couple of years from the state of Montana. You don't see that, man.
Right.
So it's, it used to be Michigan, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and a little bit of Buffalo. Now you're getting these guys from downstate, and all the downstate kids, they all play the same, man. They're all hot dogs, Zegras and, all these guys, they're all the same player profile. It's so funny. It's like they're all doing the Michigan when they're, 10 years old. The Michigan's just a shot on goal now, by the way, and I'm not being one of those old codgers like, it sucks. It's great. Goalies need to just throw their hands up, throw your arms up if you see it coming. I don't know why they don't do that. I saw a little video of a kid, though, not to get too far off track, and this is a Sabre show. We'll get back to the Sabres, but like little kid in practice, probably 10 years old. He goes, he scoops it, and the goalie just 10-year-old goalie just takes the stick and like chops the kid's arm with a stick. I thought it was the best. I was like, or do that. I'm saying just throw your arms up, but yeah. Or you can just chop the kid's arm off his body too with your goalie stick. Either way, it works. But I don't know. We'll see, man. I think that, the junior Sabres being resurrected too will help. It's helped, but but what happened to Musty though? He went and played 15U, 16U in Jersey.
Right.
Some of the
And then
better
he
players
played,
are leaving town. Then he goes to the O.
and then he goes to the O, which
You
is
know,
probably why he's not playing for Team USA, or at least
it's part of it.
contributing,
I mean, but if
I
you,
think.
yeah, it's a factor. Alex DeBrincat got cut from the team when he was having a great year in Erie when he was in juniors. I think a year after he played for the team, actually, which is kind of crazy. I get it. There's a little bit of that bias, and that's a two-way street too. Some of the American kids that come down and play, they don't love it. You're not going to avoid putting Macklin Celebrini on Team Canada just because he plays at BU. That kid's awesome, by the way. He's gonna be a great NHL player. So smart. But
He's
I
been
got
fun
way
to
off
watch.
track. Yeah. Yeah. I got way off track. I apologize. But yeah, 4-2, that's my prediction. USA. But I'm not gonna hate it if Sweden pulls it off. I'll be happy for the Sabres prospects that are on that team. They're both having really good tournaments, but I think that's a really good group, man. Good group. I love Hugo Havlet, 5'10" goalie. Can't believe he hasn't been drafted yet. Don't see. I'm going to make this a prospect podcast. I got to shut up, man. Get me on track. Get me on track. Where are we at? We're at an hour. You want to go through the chat?
Yeah, let's.
You see anything in your fancy? I haven't really looked at it. Am I
There
getting roasted
hasn't
for bringing up
been
Joel Quinn?
a lot of chatter. No roasting. Just a lot of back and forth from folks. I'm trying to find some questions. I'm thinking we got a few minutes here. Let's just throw out there, big picture wise, where the Sabres are at right now. Not looking great, in general. But what's the move going forward in your mind, roster wise? We've talked about coaching. Are you feeling like your faith in this core has wavered? The RFAs that they have, Olofsson, or not Olofsson, Jokiharju, Luukkonen, Middlestat, are those guys that you're dangling at the deadline? And as a prospect guy, which prospects, if any, do you feel like need to be potentially, are you at the point where you're ready to move some of the prospects, or do you still feel like the pipeline being strong is such an asset that, there's not a lot of room at the moment for all these guys to have spots in the top six?
No.
So as you look at the mess that they've made of themselves here a little bit, what paths do you see that they can take out of this?
I think that I don't think you're fully boxed in. Okay. Like if I look at the big contracts that they've handed out, first of all, I think everyone's currency except Darlene, maybe Levi. I think everyone else is currency. There's probably others that I know they'd love to trade. Okay. They don't want to do it. The guys that they've signed long-term, I don't think they want to, move on like the obvious extended contracts, Cousins, Power, right? Thompson. To your point though, I don't want to, like, I'm a prospect guy. I don't want to get younger though. Okay.
Right.
So they're all like even Kevin Adams last year at the trade deadline. I may have mentioned this to you, or maybe it was another podcast that I did when I was cheating on you when you were away. Last year at the deadline, Adams said Yuri Kulik is not, I forget the term he used. He's untouchable or something like that, right? Maybe in terms of the deadline he was, but in the big picture, he shouldn't be. If the right deal comes along to make your team better, and the team wants Yuri Kulik to get an established player that's going to add experience, maybe playoff experience, he's going to contribute off, like, make your team better. You can trade Yuri Kulik, guys. You know what I mean? Do I want to? Am I out there trying to shop him? No. But the team is really young. You need to get experience. And the easiest mathematical way to get experience is trade youth for some guys. You have cap room. On your point of the RFAs, and again, it's like, it's easy to talk about guys that you would move without, like, but the other point is like, what are you getting back? And I have no concept of that right now. I have no idea. We talked about this last time. You can look at Chris Johnson's trade list. It's all what is it? It's like every Calgary Flame and a couple of obvious guys, right? So there's a couple surprising to me names that I would consider trading. First of all, very early on in this podcast, we talked about staying ahead of the Casey Middlestat situation. Got to get an idea how much money he wants and how much term he wants. That tells you what you're going to do with Casey Middlestat. On paper, do you want to keep him? Of course. He's your leading scorer, right? Borderline all-star caliber season.
I think he probably should have been the all-star. Probably should have been the all-star instead of Rasmus Dahlin.
Okay.
And it would have been
but
a much more interesting story, and probably I think he earned it. But yes, there are other variables, right? To your point. You want Casey Middlestat in a vacuum. Absolutely. Do you want him at $6 million if that's what he wants, or 5.5, 6.5, whatever it may be? That's the conversation you need to have. And I think if you can get, to your point, I don't think you trade him for a first round pick or a decent prospect. I think you trade him if you can upgrade your defense or get an experienced goalie or get a different type of forward with a little bit more experience. You make a hockey trade with Casey Middlestat. I don't think you sell him for futures.
I think though that's where this next stretch of games is. That's what puts you on the clock on the Middlestat decision, because the longer you wait, well, I don't know though. It's not like he's a UFA either. You know, could you make a hockey trade at the deadline of Casey? You probably could. I still think that's a deal that might be best made earlier if you're committing to moving him. Alex Tuch.
I am of the opinion that you can't trade Alex Tuch. When you mentioned Rasmus Dahlin in terms of untouchables, I am of the opinion that Alex Tuch is a really hard player to move. Not because in a vacuum, again, if this was just in a vacuum and you're looking at, that's a nice asset, right? A $4.75 million player who's shown some real serious goal scoring chops, playoff experience. Teams would want that guy. And if you're talking from a hockey standpoint that you could make a hockey trade that would maybe make the team better, I think it's a valid conversation. The reason I don't entertain the idea of trading Alex Tuch is there is a big problem that the Sabres have related to what we were talking about with financials and coaching, of getting players to want to come to Buffalo. And that would be somewhat of I think that would create a bad image to have this guy who embraced it, wanted to come to Buffalo.
Wildly unpopular if you were to move him.
And then you trade him. Unpopular. Not even fan reaction, whatever. I can deal with fan reaction if it's the right move. I would worry more about the perception league-wide from players and agents of, man, they did that to Alex Tuch, you know? And I think Alex Tuch is a big reason why some of that perception was starting to change over the summer. And there was guys that were feeling maybe Buffalo wasn't a bad place to be. And he has sort of been the poster child for that. He has not played well this season. He's been banged up and it hasn't been great. But for that reason, you could argue his age doesn't totally fit the core or whatever. I just think you need a guy like that who's good in the room and who is good league-wide as far as showing that it can be a place that people like to play. But if you take
I'm with you. No, I'm with you.
Yeah, but I've seen his name come up, you know, in social media of fans saying, you know, he shouldn't be untouchable or whatever. But again, from a hockey standpoint, sure, I could agree. But just from all the human elements of building a professional sports team, you need to stick by that guy. And let's face it, Kevin Adams, that was his headliner trade, right? And you move that guy out. I don't know. It's just so him, Dahlin. I would throw Tage Thompson in that mix of a guy that, you know, is sort of this success story of theirs that they're not going to want to part with. And then you probably throw Power in there just because it's so early and he's still so young.
No,
and they're not, you know, but after that, I would say
that would be a massive blunder, by the way. That would be a massive blunder. If that would be the ultimate knee jerk if they like, oh, Power, like
they sell low, right?
That would be like Tampa trading Victor Hedman, you know, in his second or third year. And then it becomes, I'm not saying Power's necessarily going to become him, but he could. Potential's there. It's way too early to your point. I bring up talk just because you got to talk about it at least once and just kind of move on from the discussion. I agree with you. The easiest thing is to move some prospects and bundle them. But again, what are you getting in return that's going to help the team? Would I trade? So I like Savoy. Would I trade him? Yeah, of course. If I can make the team better, you trade. I think it's all currency. Everybody's on the table. You're not winning this year with the group that you have. You came close last year though, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
they bet on the year-over-year growth. That's what makes this hard. They bet on the year-over-year maturation of a young team, taking them to the next level, and they've actually gone backwards. So that's
And
how
is
you
that
start
to
looking at the
say,
group.
right? Is that to say that they can't return to that level? But I don't think you can bank on it again. You can't just keep banking on it. And Brian Cummings brings up a good point in the chat in regards, I believe, to Casey Middlestat, saying we're talking about trading a guy leading the team in scoring despite playing with every other forward in the organization at some point. And I agree. Like, I like Casey Middlestat as a player and what he's become. And he's a super well-liked guy in the room. The competitiveness that he's shown in the last few years, I think the question becomes, what does he want to be paid? That's where it comes down to. And to your point, I think all of these are probably better summer discussions, because that's when, you have a little bit more time to breathe, and you're, making hockey trades most likely. That's when those types of moves happen. They don't need to do it at the
Are we
deadline.
talking our way into thinking that the Sabres are going to stay with this core group through the rest of the season, not make moves, and keep the coach? I
Probably.
mean, let's check back in. Let's check back at the end of the month.
Yeah. Because a couple of things. One would be from a seller standpoint at the deadline. You're just selling off UFAs, right? Because I think because they're not in a position, like we said, to get younger and to get prospects. So if you're trading Middlestat, the market for Middlestat at the deadline is teams making a push that are saying, we'll give you our pick, and that's currency. So maybe you consider a move like that because you could flip the pick, whatever. But to make a hockey trade, you're probably waiting until the summer. So really, you're talking about what, Gergensons and Eric Johnson as your chips at the deadline, which you're not getting much. You're just doing that for their sake, dumping them to a playoff team to give them a chance to play some meaningful hockey. I don't think you're doing that with Okposo because, he's your captain and his family's entrenched here. But maybe if he wanted to maybe go to, if Minnesota came calling or whatever. But the question with a Middlestat, and we've got some, like when we brought this up last time, there was some pushback, but it's about building your team for years down the road. So, Upstate Ev is saying move Cousins before Middlestat. So now he's thinking along the
Not
lines of
me.
but he's thinking along the right lines in the sense that there's not room for both of them necessarily if Middlestat's a $6-7 million player. And is that money better spent elsewhere? That's, I think, the big Middlestat question, and one that they'll have to answer, because by the All-Star game last year, they had signed they had signed both Tage and Cousins. So, not to say the clock is ticking on Middlestat, there's plenty of time to sign him, but his price and nailing that down is a little bit different than nailing down Cousins and Thompson and things like that.
Cousins and Mitz is a heart and soul guy. Both of these are true. But Cousins, to me, I still maintain, like, I'm not going to, like, bang my, hands on the desk and say it has to happen. Cousins is captain material. If you elect to not go the Darlene route as your captain, Cousins is a guy that could be the leader of this team down the line. I've said it before on this podcast. It's worth saying again in the context of this discussion. I know what you're saying, that there might not be room for both. But man, I would have
Maybe
a hard
not
time
room for
trading Dylan
both.
Cousins, because when he's on, he's playing the right way.
There might not be room for both and all these top end forward prospects they have, right? So
Mhm.
when you're talking about making room for some guys, somebody's got to move out, and Jeff Skinner can't because of his contract. And, Paterka and Quinn are solid pieces in your top six that aren't really going anywhere. So
What are you getting though?
Benson's
Like, you trade a couple prospects for like a Colton Parayko type of player or something. Like, I'm just throwing a name out there. Is like that? Is that like the type of player that you go for? I'm trying to think. Like again, I don't want to sit here and play like I don't want to do these message board trades. That's not what I'm trying to
right.
do. I'm just trying to think. Like I have to think about it more. I think you're right on the money though. Like I think that the move. I think that's where I land right now at whatever time it is on January 4th is probably bundle a couple prospects because that's where you have wealth for a defenseman. You're like another defenseman. Are you going to block Ryan Johnson? I mean, Samuelson, I'm okay with Samuelson. He hasn't been great this year, but I mean, I'm not moving him right now, I don't think, unless the right deal comes along. He's not untouchable. Like you might create more issues by adding a defenseman without a plan to ease the logjam there too. You mentioned Yoki Haru, right? Coming up on his next
Yep.
deal.
I think Yoki Haru and Luukkonen are two summer pieces. But the reason I bring these guys up too is that a lot of people want to
You move
see
him.
moves
Yeah.
made or change things up or this or that. You got to give up something, right? Like you got to either
Well,
give up your
every
good
good
prospect.
trade has to hurt a little. We say it
Exactly.
all the
Like,
time,
right.
right?
Like, and because it's easy to sit there and be like, trade Olofsson. It's like, well, nobody wants him, right? Like he's makes a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
money and he's not, people see what everybody else sees. Yogi Haru, Luukkonen, these are guys that people might see something in, or you could make a swap that could help you out. And Brian Cummings brings up another good point about how did we land on liking a lot of the players yet hating the team? Like they have to figure out how the whole ended up being so much less than the sum of its parts, and it's because they're missing, I think, a few key types of parts, types of players, experience, but I think that's also a coaching thing.
Jam though.
Right.
Matt, what did we talk about at the top though, man? Like you notice Jack Quinn coming back in the lineup for the way that he plays. That's what they've been missing. Maybe it doesn't have to be this huge splash though, too. We talked about it weeks ago. The glue guy, the experienced guy that plays his ass off. He might not be a 25 goal scorer, but you're going to get good energy out of him. Maybe that's what they were trying to do with going out and getting Robinson, who's scratched tonight, like a better version of Eric Robinson.
The guy I kept thinking
Like good
about,
teams always have a player like Talbot. Remember, like Talbot from the
yeah,
Penguins. Like good teams always have a guy like that.
the guy I kept thinking about that was out there over the summer was Garnett Hathaway. And
Don't even get me started because it was Hathaway and Miles Wood were right there, man.
right
Now maybe they
and
did. Maybe they elected. Maybe they did a Patrick Kane say I don't want to go to Buffalo.
yeah,
But I doubt
maybe
it. I'm with you, dude, on both of those guys.
Garnett Hathaway, seeing him come in here, and I mean, man, first of all, if you sign him, maybe Cousins is having a better year because he doesn't have to wear the shield for a month because Hathaway's the one who gave him that gift. But that was the type of player where it's like not a cost prohibitive move. And instead it was bring back Ergenson's, bring back Jost, and let it ride. I didn't have a problem with bringing back Okposo, and he's actually playing pretty well. Another under the radar thing that happened while I was gone. Okposo found the fountain of youth a little bit. But yeah, that's to Brian's point, what I think I can see the potential of a lot of individuals and understand why they've committed to this core, while also saying a lot of obvious moves to supplement the core just were not made. They didn't get a top 4 defenseman in the offseason. Instead, they signed Johnson and Clifton. They did not add to the bottom 6. They did not go and get an experienced goaltender. So it's the supplementing part, the difficult part of the rebuild that they haven't been able to execute. And I think Kevin Adams is going to get a crack at doing it. We haven't taught. It's funny, we talk about Don Granato's job, but we're not talking about Kevin Adams' job, and he holds a lot of responsibility. But I just think we can all agree that it seems like a move Terry Pagula would not make. So And I do think he deserves a chance to round out this core. It's just a matter of action that we haven't seen enough of, urgency from the general manager that hasn't been there the last couple of years.
How did this podcast devolve into this discussion? If you think about it, they won 6-1 tonight,
Right. They did.
right? They looked pretty good. They're healthy relatively. They're missing their captain, right? Akposo's out. Is he the only guy injured right now? I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think so. I guess mentally I wasn't prepared for this conversation tonight. I knew we were going to talk about it a little bit down the road, but hopefully this conversation that we just had the past 15, 20 minutes doesn't matter.
Right.
For the fans.
Maybe it doesn't. Maybe they get it
maybe
back on
that
track.
Schedule. Yeah.
I think we had this conversation in part because of being off here for 2 or 3 weeks and missed our opportunity to have it. So I had a lot of thoughts bottled up and felt like I needed to, I missed Festivus. So here I am airing some grievances and wondering out loud about what happens if by the time we record next week, whatever day it may be, if they've lost to the Penguins and lost to the Kraken, then we're sitting there and we're saying we're probably talking about some of these things.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I shouldn't have said devolve. I was just like, maybe it was an opportunity that they played well. And, I'm trying to be optimistic, man. Like my whole thing on life, not just in Sabres, is like, man, life's too short to be online bitching about everything. There's too many people that do that. But the fact of the matter is, though, this team, there's opportunity to make them better. That's our job to figure it out and get the fan feedback on what they think the moves are, need to be made, who's expendable. I just think, though, when you look at the big picture, kind of like, you think about the trade board, I don't think the Sabres are going to be in on Tanev. I don't think they're going to be in on Hanifin. Those guys are going to go to contenders. There's some
Tanev
links to
nice
like
piece,
Jersey.
Though, wouldn't Tanev be
he'd be great.
He'd be awesome. But that's, I think, the point about.
Okay, so here's the thing. Win 7 of the next 10, and maybe you change your mind and you're like, I need that guy.
I think that's the big thing is if you're not buying, what are you doing? Right. And if it's sitting on your hands until the summer, then it better be a busy summer, I think is what it comes down to. So you either play your way, play your way into being a buyer, or all these questions are what we'll be talking about for the next few months and into the summer, because that's it. If you're not a buyer, then you're something else, and you're not quite a seller, right? You're not just going to be selling parts and tearing the thing down to the studs. So they're caught in that muddy middle, and the next few weeks will tell us which way they go.
Matthew, we're at an hour and a half almost. I've missed you, by the way. Glad to have you back. I'm sure that our listeners and viewers have also missed you. This is good. This is healthy discussion. I haven't thought of the team like this in a while. So this is kind of good. You got me thinking about things.
I got going. I got, I had a lot of stuff rattling around the old brain in these 3 a.m., feeding the baby, wondering, what are they going to do with Casey Middlestat, right? Asking my newborn son, what can they do here? What does Kevin Adams need to do? These are the things that go through my brain, my sleep-deprived brain, as I'm wandering through these days.
Yeah. As of now, like I said, I don't want to be the broken record here. I think that the easiest move is to, yes, you can bundle some prospects, trade some prospects, find the right team that's maybe looking to matchmake, that wants to get a little more stocked in their pipeline. Sabres have assets there. It all depends on what you're going to get back. It's going to make your team better. That's the easiest move to make. Those unknown commodities at the NHL level, it's easier to move those. We know that not all prospects pan out. Lord knows I can tell you that with great certainty. But I don't know. I guess we'll keep talking about, we got to keep monitoring this team. Next, I think this is an important stretch coming up. This is a really important month, obviously, stating the obvious. Hour and a half in. Matthew, anything else on your mind? Fresh? Are you going to save some bullets in the gun for the next time?
I feel like we should save some. That was most of what was on my mind, but I know more will come to mind as these games start to happen and things start to materialize. But this was good. This was got a lot covered from what we missed.
Were you rusty? You feeling rusty?
Probably.
I'm feeling rusty.
A little bit.
All right.
You know, I'm probably
Good.
like I said, I'm not as sharp, right? I'm a little. Haven't been sleeping as much as I was when we first started doing this podcast, so it could be good or bad. Maybe I'll be more entertaining with no sleep. I don't know. It should help for the
I think that's a
late
good way
night
to.
games.
Well, let's get you to bed then. Let's get you to bed.
It's a
You
good
probably
idea.
have to file. All right. Well, then on that note, again, good to have you back, kid. Congratulations on the new little one. That's awesome. You didn't name him Christopher. I forgive you. Next time, maybe.
Well,
Can we talk about this? Can I buy my way in?
Tage named his baby.
He did
after
name
you,
him Baker.
so that works.
He did, actually. He did. I didn't want to tell him it was about me, but it was about me. All right. Enough farting around. Once again, like the video if you haven't already. Please subscribe to the channel. Find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a 5-star review. Dump all over Matthew for being away for a month in the comments.
Do it.
And
as long as you leave
Fairburn
5 stars.
From The Athletic. 5 stars. Say whatever you want. That's right. Say whatever you want. Make fun of my new glasses. I feel really old, dude, wearing these, by the way. We'll talk about that next episode. For Matthew Fairburn from The Athletic, for the production crew in the truck outside of my house, I'm Chris Baker. Really appreciate everyone joining, and we'll see you again next time.